Those of you who were here on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day may be experiencing some deja vu with this gospel lesson. You might be starting to think, has Thomas lost it? Because this is now the third time I've heard this lesson, though you've been hearing bits and pieces of it throughout these services. You might remember that it began by a decree from the Emperor Augustus that all the world should be registered. And it now culminates in the circumcision of the child after 8 days and his naming as Jesus. For those of you who are here Christmas morning, I mentioned that the question that was offered to historian Tom Holland when he was a student in his Roman history class. What was the most significant event in the life of Caesar Augustus? And I told you that his teacher suggested that that most significant event wasn't the Battle of Actium, as you would all immediately guess. It was, in fact, the birth of Jesus. This progression from Emperor Augustus to Jesus' circumcision seems curious, and the curiosity is highlighted by their names and their faith. I am sure all of you classical historians that you are know that the Emperor Augustus wasn't actually named Augustus. His name was Gaius Octavius, or Octavian. Octavian had avenged the death of his adopted father, Julius Caesar, by hunting down Mark Antony and his co-conspirator Cleopatra. That story you probably are familiar with. But then he brought political stability of a sort to a fractious political climate in Rome itself by becoming the first emperor. So much for the Republic. Rome was at the time quite grateful, and this peace Octavian brought helped Rome to prosper a brand new way. The title that Octavian held, princeps, hearkened memories of Rome's founding. Some senators wanted to bestow upon him the name Romulus, which was one of the two founders of the city of Rome, as Octavian had clearly restored Rome's situation in the world. But it was another founding legend that they went with. It was said that on the day of Rome's founding that 12 eagles had flown over the Palatine, something supernatural and superhuman that the Romans had long described as Augustus. And that was it. Imperator Caesar, by official vote of the Senate, was awarded the name Augustus. That name surpassed title or rank and yet spoke volumes about the person. I wonder what you consider to be the most important thing in a name. Is it something which connects to family or heritage or history? Is it something you hope for and expect for the child to grow into? Is it something from what you see or get a sense of as you gaze at that newborn child? Mary and Joseph named this child Jesus because they're faithful. And the angel Gabriel told them to name the child Jesus. The miracle itself might be that they actually did what they were told. This miraculous child receives a name which was pretty common and ordinary, and yet they're told that this child would be anything but ordinary. The whole experience of Jesus was Augustus. And yet Jesus' life could scarcely match Caesar Augustus' life. Jesus would not live in a palace. He wouldn't command legions scattered across the known world. He wouldn't engage in the art of politics. He wasn't going to build cities or conquer regions and peoples in the name of a Pax Romana. Jesus would spend nearly 30 years in complete obscurity, presumably living as a carpenter. He would go about daily life, eating food, having conversations, living as most people of Judea lived. And then he would be baptized by John, set out to call a group of disciples, heal the sick, feed the hungry, liberate those captive to all sorts of issues. and he would offer himself in love to bring others, anyone he met, closer to life with God. Not the God of Rome, not Julius Caesar, not Caesar Augustus, but Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jesus would live into his name. What's particularly notable about this passage from Luke, the third time we now hear it, is how ordinary this extraordinary life is. Circumcision is the sign of the covenant between God and Abraham, and between God and Abraham's descendants. Mary and Joseph are part of this tradition, this heritage of faith, this relationship to God which doesn't come from honors bestowed upon, but from God's willingness to embrace us. They embrace Jesus and give him the name Gabriel told them they should give him. What this really seems to be all about to me is obedience or faithfulness to God. There's nothing particularly unusual about Jesus' name, which means Yahweh saves, other than Mary and Joseph's willingness to give the child the name. His name, like his vocation, is to be a Savior. Jesus' name continues to be invoked by those looking for a Savior, looking for liberation, looking for freedom, looking for a way out from the evils of the world which Augustus Caesar represented. Jesus shows us what it means to be at peace. Peace, as Jesus embodies it, isn't a state of past or present, but a process toward a future we're called to live and work into. Peace isn't a moment of zen or an uninterrupted period of fulfillment. It's not living happily ever after with what we deserve or are entitled to. Peace is restored relationship, right relationship, and a sense of belonging which comes in relationship. This is how Jesus lives into his name and his identity as a faithful person of God. He restores relationships. He doesn't do this by removing all the conflict from the world or crushing others in order to achieve victory. Jesus shows us peace by embracing differences, not avoiding all tension, and recognizing others' humanity within all the conflict. Jesus takes our humanity and shows us what salvation can look like for all of us. In Jesus, in God, we can find peace within ourselves and with one another. It was Caesar Augustus' census for the sake of the empire which led Mary and Joseph to be in Bethlehem. The birth of Jesus and his life, which invites us into his name, will reverse that census, rejecting status of empire in favor of status of God, the God who counts all people as God's own. Yahweh saves isn't simply a name, it's a way of life which comes in relationships which build all of us up, making all of us Augustus.